Hello and welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast. I'm your host, Jack Hopkins. Today's guest has spent the last 3 decades deeply involved in Democratic politics. Eric Lims got his start as a college volunteer on a campaign swing for Vice President Al Gore, which led to a White House internship during the Clinton administration. After time in corporate leadership with major Fortune 500 companies, he returned to politics, spending most of 2016 on the road with the Clinton campaign. Since then, he's been all in on local organizing. He served on the Maricopa County Democratic Party board, worked as deputy executive director, and now leads the organization as its executive director. Okay, so Eric, and these questions like this are always tough on the spot to answer. I'm asking you to really compress 3 decades, but to the best of your ability, how's it changed in the last 30 years? If you were to step back and just kind of look at the timeline and say, gosh, we start here and now we're here, how's it changed?
Well, the technology that's deployed on campaigns it's just changed tremendously, right? So when I first got into this space, which would have been during the Clinton years, that's my first presidential election in '92. It was 24-hour news cycle, almost exclusively in CNN. That was pre-Fox, that was pre-MSNBC, obviously pre-digital media. And Bill Clinton and his campaign and his people were trailblazers at that medium, right? And kind of, you and I are probably of a certain age. Remember the town hall style?
You bet.
It was kind of a first then. He had, a young guy by the name of George Stephanopoulos at the time, who's of course now been with ABC News forever, and then James Carville and Paul McDowell were then unknowns, but obviously subsequently became very famous from that campaign. And so that was kind of where we began. And then you get into the 2000s, the internet, the advent of the internet, about probably, and its usage and utilization in campaigns around the early 2000s. And Howard Dean was able to raise an amazing amount of money just from online donations. Then you move over into the kind of the Obama era of it, and forgive me, I tend to look at it through the lens of the who kind of using the internet to organize, and he had a big kind of an army of ground on the ground organizing there, and then now I am gonna go to a Republican. Then you go with the Donald Trump era, and what did he master? He used the technology of targeted digital media, and really blew the doors off that and destroyed the Hillary Clinton campaign in that regard in 2016, and frankly has never looked back from that. But now we're kind of, you look at, 2025, where, you combine all those things, kind of, the media rapid response side, the online donations, the targeted digital advertising. And, we're kind of in an era now where, frankly, I say the Republicans are ahead of the Democrats on that. But it's where all of those technologies have kind of come to the fore now. And one big thing is kind of gives us what we see today. So kind of from where we began and where we are, it's really just been an incredible trajectory. And it's really been a lot of fun to kind of be a witness to that history.
Oh, I can't imagine. It's interesting to me how quickly we forget some things or don't have them kind of lined up in our mind. When you said, kind of the advent of the internet, and as you said that, I bought my first personal computer in '97. It was an old Packard Bell with a monitor the size of a Frigidaire, right? And I don't often, when I'm thinking politically, I don't often put those two together. And so to think about what an exciting but yet uncharted territory and time that must have been. You've got this new technology, and yet It's new, so you're having to kind of figure it out as you go along. Was that anything that, from a technological aspect, that ever caused any problems?
Well, I think it causes, well, I think for presidential campaigns, I think, you find out there's problems, frankly, after election day when you find out whether you win or lose, right? I
Sure.
think if you look below the presidential level where stuff, frankly, is not as sophisticated, right? I mean, for the statewide races, governors and U.S. Senate, some of those, if they're well resourced enough, you get kind of technology that's more or less on par with some of what you see at the presidential level.
Yeah.
Below that, everything is a lot more of a bootstrap nature, right?
Right.
And so you have to be you don't have access to as many things financially, technologically. You have to be a lot more clever and making um, fewer resources go the furthest type of a thing. So in that regard, you really realize it as you kind of move down in the level of campaign.
Yeah.
Another major difference I will say in campaigns is and I would say this probably started to happen about 10 to 15 years ago range. The data that's in these campaigns. Now, it's kind of ironic that at the time where data has become a very much bigger thing inside of campaigns, polling's gotten worse and worse and worse as we've seen. So I think there's a lot of reasons for that. Landlines to cell lines and age
Yeah.
stuff, pickup rates and all that kind of thing, I think is kind of some of the cause for that. And it's just harder to do polling for a variety of systemic reasons. But by data, I specifically mean, you now have people with master's degrees and some type of, or PhDs in some cases, in a STEM type science inside of presidential campaigns running your numbers.
Yeah.
And looking and slicing the numbers several different ways to try to identify and isolate the people you need to target. And that has really there's been a huge uptick in that,
Yeah.
uh, probably about the past decade or so.
So when you look back to your earliest beginnings in politics, does it seem like a fairly antiquated time compared to what they're able to do now with technology, or is it just kind of all blended together for you?
No, it was an antiquated time. I mean, well, I can go back pre-90s before I kind of got into it. You be kind of, and we've seen this kind of portrayed in movies where, a campaign office, and you have a bunch of cubicles and people at phones and, like all that stuff we do virtually now, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's, which frankly cuts down on things like real estate costs too, right?
Sure.
So, and phone line costs and those kinds. So look, I mean, I think, the other kind of perspective I bring to it is, I was in the corporate business world for a number of years before I got into this full time.
Yes.
And it just so happens my chosen industry was software and technology.
Oh, interesting.
So I
Wow.
spent a decade at places like Microsoft and SAP. So I also say I'm able to kind of connect technology to politics probably more fluidly than
Sure.
a lot of other folks are.
Yeah.
Um, that's also why the other stuff looks more antiquated too, to be honest. So.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, because especially over the last decade, Arizona has been a big deal in politics, right? In elections. What is it that makes Maricopa County so important politically?
So, first of all, we're very big. And we are the fourth largest county in the United States. And frankly, you and your listeners probably can guess the other three, right?
Sure.
So, New York, New York, including Manhattan, Cook County, which is Chicago, LA County. And then we have Harris County. Actually, we actually were bigger than Manhattan, but Harris County, which is Houston, and then Maricopa County. We're close to 5 million people. In terms of voting jurisdiction, we're the second largest behind LA County. So we're larger than 26 states. Probably most importantly, we're actually considered battleground, where all the other counties I mentioned are deep blue.
Yeah.
Of those,
Yes.
we're the only battleground county.
Right.
So you pretty much have to win Maricopa County to win Arizona.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
That's a
that makes it
significant deal.
very important.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. What I'm trying to think, as we were discussing a little bit before we went live, uh, I was out in the Arizona, in the Phoenix area in 1990. And when you said 5 million, I have no idea what the numbers were back then, but they were considerably smaller. I know
And
that.
since
So
then it's doubled. Since then it's doubled, probably around about doubled. Yeah.
yeah, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a pretty big piece of the pie in terms of importance, right? Just sheer numbers.
Yeah, and I mean, we look at just the sheer numbers, and then you also add in we're not dense like some of these other, or as dense as some of those other communities as well, right?
Yeah.
So when you think of Cook County, that pretty much is predominantly Chicago, which is pretty dense. And even LA is dense in its own way. I mean, it doesn't like go upward like Manhattan or New York does, of course, but there's no kind of like empty parcels of land in LA County, really,
Right.
right?
Right.
So, so the reason why I raise that is because Maricopa County is not just talking to people virtually or digitally, what have you, but even in my job day to day, I physically travel all over the county, and so getting to one corner of it versus another,
Sure.
I mean, that just adds complexities just with our volunteer work and when people are door to door canvassing. That's frankly, a lot of zip codes that you have to cover, even if you're, paying for
Right.
media. And so, not to mention the driving that you're doing as a candidate, right?
Right.
And so last year we actually ran pretty much a full slate of county candidates for various offices, ranging from county attorney down to county supervisor. And I can tell you, our countywide candidates, I mean, they're kind of feeling like they're driving across a state, even
Yeah.
though it's one county. So,
I was going to say, I mean, just thinking, comparing it to Manhattan or LA County, I kind of use as a reference, as you were talking about that, the number of saguaro cactuses. You go by cacti. Yeah, you think about the density of Manhattan, and then you look at Maricopa County, and gosh, it's different in so many ways, just in terms of how you work.
and we have in the various parts of the county are different in terms of um, socioeconomics, right? So
Right.
you have kind of in the northeast part of the county is not only affluent, but it's kind of nestled in a lot of mountains too.
Right.
And those communities are gated. So just the things that I think about as a political hack kind of person is you can't knock doors in communities like that just because of the
Right.
terrain, because they're gated. So you have to pay to reach those voters, right? Uh,
Right.
whereas, and then you also have in the far southwest, even though kind of our farmland is going away, and that's another major difference between now and 1990 is when you're flying into Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, you'd see lots of, fields and farmland and so forth, and most of that's been replaced by, factories, assembly lines, Amazon fulfillment facilities, and the like. There's a $60 billion, yes, $60 billion development in the north part of town from Taiwan Semiconductor. They're building kind of like their U.S. headquarters here,
Wow.
and so that looks a lot different. But in the far southwest, where there is kind of still some of those fields, that is more rural. So you're kind of mixing in rural, ex-urban, suburban, and urban. Um, so that variety also makes it just a very fun, unique, and fun place to do politics.
Yeah. Sounds like the landscape has changed considerably. I remember when I came in from the north, the first time I was in Arizona and hit Sun City, and I called a buddy of mine that lived in Mesa, and he gave me directions. And there were wide open spaces between,
Oh, yeah.
I mean, wide open spaces between Sun City and Mesa. I'm guessing those have dwindled down to,
Those are long, those are long gone, Jack. And
yeah,
And I would say, so your surrounding cities in Mesa, Chandler, Queen Creek are kind of the big ones out there. Yeah, that's all kind of filled in. It's just truly incredible, and also because of what you're seeing, because of the growth, housing prices also just kind of, we used to be kind of this best kept secret out here, and now
Right.
people figured out that, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have earthquakes. It's hot as heck, but
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
people will kind of discover this, the quality of life here is just a lot of fun. And so consequently, the demand for housing has just gone up as well.
Yeah. Well, what has that done to the political landscape, that growth?
So it's been fascinating because, you really see a lot of interesting thing with the migration patterns here, right? So, we've had a very healthy mix of people coming from um, really all over the country, ranging from the Midwest to the Northeast. Very curiously, frankly, sports, and I know you and I are both kind of sports fans as well in our own ways,
Yeah.
has had something of an impact on that because we've hosted a number of major events. We've hosted
Sure.
several Super Bowls, and then of course the Fiesta Bowl's gotten very large.
Yeah.
We hosted college basketball tournament last. And so what happens is people travel out here for one reason or another. They discover they love it, and then they migrate out here. And we've hosted a lot of teams from the East, and so that's kind of led to people from that part of the country migrating out here.
Yeah.
So when you get people coming from and then I also suspect we have a fair number of California refugees who, the housing price over there is just such that, hey, it's just, we got to get out of here kind of a thing, right? So,
Gotcha.
so I think the net of that, the impact on politics is the state, frankly, has become closer, right?
Yes. Yes.
It's, politically, probably more divided. I'd say it was probably in the eras of, say, 1990 to maybe 2010, 2015, pretty solidly red, I would
Mm.
say.
Yeah.
We did have a couple of Democrats who did well statewide in that era, who I would say, for their own set of reasons, were kind of just special talents. Janet Napolitano comes to mind.
Yeah.
But by and large, I mean, pretty solidly red. But really, in the past decade or so, I think the migrations patterns have kind of made it closer. And so that's what we're seeing.
Gotcha. You spent some time in the Fortune 500 world, the corporate world, right? I'm curious about how that experience shaped your political leadership skills. And you mentioned that you were involved in kind of the software sector. So what did you carry over into politics, and maybe what did you not so much?
So, and let me preface, even though I name dropped Microsoft before, that does not mean I'm a software developer engineer. I was more, again, on the, I have an MBA, so I was kind of more on the strategy corporate side of
Sure.
things. But um, I used a lot of analytical skills when I was in the business world, and that was something I was immediately able to connect to politics. And um, and every day I'm always kind of, I have to manage a budget, for example. I have to build a budget and manage to it. That's something that it was easy for me just to kind of transfer over that I'd still use on a daily basis. And I use that not just in my current role, at Maricopa County Democratic Party, but also even when I've been a campaign manager, I have to do that. So that's something that, I was able just to kind of easily just kind of bring that skill set, and merge that with the political world. I would say, one thing that I've tried to kind of, I don't want to say leave behind that let's say I've tried to not replicate is, there's certainly politics is cutthroat when it's like Democrat versus Republican. Yes, like your kind of
Yes.
political opponents. In the corporate world, there's an element of that even inside your own division, right?
Sure.
And when I was with Microsoft at that era, it was about 20 years ago now. It kind of had if you remember the old CEO Jack Welch at General Electric,
Yes.
it kind of had that culture to it,
Yeah.
and that created a lot of moments in certain times of the year, angst within the team. So one thing I've always tried to foster is kind of a family atmosphere in the teams that I lead, and I foster a relationship of trust. Um, Trust, I think, is paramount within a political team. I think because this is an environment where, especially for candidates, um, they have to be more vulnerable than they've ever been in their lives. Okay, um, and sometimes it's not just the candidate himself or herself; it's their family as well. And those principals have to trust you and the team around them um, without hesitation. And so, just kind of fostering that that sense of team and family and trust is something that I've tried to um, foster in this life that unfortunately I wasn't really empowered to do maybe in a previous life, as I said.
Sure. Would it be fair to say that the higher the level of trust, the quicker things rebound when people do disagree with each other, when there is a flare up, that if the level of trust is deep, it tends not to be that big a deal. But if the level of trust is kind of low or just barely there, then those disagreements can become deal breakers.
So here's the thing, you don't have to, even I'm talking within the team itself, right? You don't have to agree with your principal or your candidate on every single thing, right?
Sure.
You both just have a shared goal that you want to win.
Right.
And as long as you guys are on the same page there, um, you know, disagreements you don't take personally. You just have
Right.
a different approach for a different reason. You come to it with a certain sense of, well, okay, you and I are going to agree to disagree, but let's roll forward and let's do it, and then you move on. You don't hold on to
Sure.
that emotion. One thing that I think candidates confront that maybe kind of their political operatives might have a different perspective on. I'm fortunate enough now that I happen to have a lot of personal vested interest in it because this is my hometown and my home state. And
Right.
so any candidates that run, I'm as emotionally invested in it as they are.
Right.
What you see a lot in this profession is you get road warrior kind of campaign manager types who will manage a congressional campaign. And sometimes, those campaign managers want you to go hyper negative and go negative against your opponent and all that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And, the candidate's like, look, I got to live here afterward, you know, and,
Right.
and so that's sometimes where things can get a little,
Yeah.
but again, if you have a shared mission and you trust each other on that level, you don't really take anything personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think of that along the lines that you mentioned when uh, over the years we've seen candidates that didn't even remotely live close to the area or the state even that they were running who come in and I always thought of that in terms of attempting to establish trust there. It's I can only imagine it's a lot more difficult to do, and you've got to have some really big treat you're dangling in front of your potential constituents when you do that because of the lack of trust. Let's talk about a name again that's been mentioned, but one that maybe a few people listening will know, and that's Clinton. What lessons from the 2016 Clinton campaign can we pull forward to now as we look forward? And I hate to say this, but I would be I just wouldn't be authentic if I didn't say this. When we look at the midterms and we look at 2028, in the forefront of everybody's mind now is will we have a free and fair election, right? That is there are still things hanging out there about this last election in terms of we know that wasn't even a question mark. We know that there was Russian interference again,
Right.
just as there had been in 2020. Now that he's in the White House again, based on how he has portrayed himself since he's been in office, public statements that he has made, uh, things he intends to do. I mean, when somebody comes out and tells you they're maybe looking at a third term,
Yeah.
you have to take them seriously in this situation. Um, what can we, knowing those things,
Yeah.
fearing those things, because let's be honest, voters are fearful right now, right? There's an element of fear uh, that we've had over the last 8 years, but now with some of the things that we've seen happen, I think that that level of fear has elevated. What can we bring forward? Let me back up. What have you brought forward
Right.
that people like me will be glad that you brought forward from those lessons that can be applied now and in the future?
Yeah, no. So I think the number one thing is, and let me preface by saying I think one, if I look back to kind of what happened in 2016, one thing that I think is oft overlooked is, and that's not to say that I think Secretary Clinton lost for this variety of reasons, but I think we can't ignore the fact that it's really hard to get three in a row. Okay.
Right.
So that going into the campaign for her in particular, that was a headwind that already she was facing to try to get three in a row. And the American people, they like to kind of do a change after 8 years, right? So there's that. But I think for me, I think that I've kind of learned is, and I want to be careful in saying this. I don't for a moment think that the inside the Clinton campaign itself that we took things for granted. I mean, I know that I can speak that I was very focused. I happened to be working on the campaign in Michigan. Well, I did two things. One, I worked on the National Convention staff in 2016, and the show itself was incredible and great and successful and all of that. And we were very focused on making that a great experience, for her and for the country. And even when I worked in Michigan in the final weeks of the campaign, all my teammates were very focused, and I suspect they were very focused in Brooklyn where the headquarters was.
Sure.
But I think, one degree out from the actual paid campaign itself, amongst the activists and certainly amongst the media, I think people just took for granted she was going to win. I certainly think, I mean, I hate to bring this name up. I certainly think James Comey assumed that she was going to win, and a lot of
Right.
his behavior was impacted by that. So
Right.
I think that, not letting one's foot up off the gas ever until you cross that finish line is a lesson that all of us need to learn. All of us. Don't take, anything you're doing, inside the campaign for granted. Always stay focused on mission. Um, yeah, and just don't let your foot up off the gas until you get to the finish line is a lesson that we just need to learn and stick to. I think the good news now is I think the urgency is such that people are locked in. And frankly, if anything, I think we have kind of the reverse problem now is based on what I'm seeing and hearing when I travel the county. It's like, what can we do now, now, right? Because people just can't wait until November of 26.
Sure.
So the lesson, you just got to keep your foot on the gas and run through the tape.
I want to ask you a question to see how much this kind of philosophy I have pairs up with what you just said. And it may not pair up at all, but I suspect there may be a little overlap, and I'd like to get your feedback on it. I wrote an article a few weeks ago that was essentially talking about the inherent danger of making a political candidate a celebrity superstar. In that it can be a double-edged sword, right? That their celebrity status can become so big that then there is just an assumption, well, of course they're going to win. They're so big. They're the Oprah, right, of politics. Who else would win? Who could beat them? And so I want, obviously it's a balancing act, because on the one hand you have to make sure everybody knows who the candidate is, and
All right.
they have to be big. But is there a fine line you have to pay attention to there with getting them so big in a celebrity type way that it starts working against the campaign?
Well, what's interesting about that is when you look over the years at kind of who the nominees have been in the United States, going back at least again, so I've been in this 30 years, right?
Right.
Um, it tends to fit, the winners tend to be people with the shortest paper trail. Um,
Interesting.
Even George W. Bush, he'd been governor what? Now, he had the family name, obviously, but
Right.
he'd been governor, I believe, only 6 years. Barack Obama, U.S. Senator, 4 years. Trump, of course, had never served in any type of elective or public office before. So, in the United States, unlike, say, a Germany, for example, where, I mean, Merkel was, uh, PM for chancellor for 20 years, and then I think in the parliament for several decades before that, right?
Right. Right.
By comparison, um, the United States, there might be something to be said for people like fresh faces, right?
Right.
Um, it's also kind of harder to caricature somebody who's more of a fresher face.
Yes.
And
And I'm guessing if I can interrupt you for a second, that caricature effect can cut both ways as well. Would that be?
it can. But what I would say is, the person maybe perhaps with the shorter paper trail might have a little more, I guess, latitude, the
Okay.
techniques
Right.
that they can use as well, right?
You bet.
They probably don't necessarily operate by a rule book that's been used for 10 or 20 years. It can cut both ways. Um, to your question is, can celebrity be too much? I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think that at the presidential level, you particularly once you're the nominee, you're always going to get a lot of free kind of paid
Right.
free earned media, right? Because there's only two candidates, and the media is always fascinated by who the nominees are and all of that. Um, I would say bringing us back down to local. Um, Frankly, I loved having an astronaut run for U.S. Senate. I'm not gonna lie about that, right?
Sure. Sure.
Especially when our candidate, and for your listeners, I'm being very specific about U.S. Senator Mark Kelly, when he was running against Martha McSally, who also, as you know, had an extremely impressive military background.
Right.
And so, and certainly I think once you get below the presidential level, I think you might even prefer celebrity in some respects. So it
Yeah.
probably also depends on the race and the level of race you're looking at too.
I can only imagine that if I or anyone else were to in the middle of a campaign, right, come to a campaign manager and say, I think your candidate's name's getting too big. I probably wouldn't meet with somebody that would agree with me if what I hear you saying. And I certainly understand that dichotomy. Hey, yeah, I suppose having listened to what you had to say, what I wrote about might be true, but in general, you probably still would want to lean towards bigger name.
I'm actually gonna punt here. I'd say it's case by case, and here's why I say that. Some celebrities have certain skills that we like to see in politics. Better skills than, say, others.
Yeah.
I'll just be very specific on some names here. I personally think that Donald Trump has better raw skills than, say, a George Clooney.
Sure,
Okay.
sure,
So look, I'm right there with George Clooney on his political ideology and
sure.
beliefs, but
I
you
would
know,
agree with you, by the way.
but as terms of his raw skills to do this kind of thing, I mean, I just don't think he would be as good as Trump. So I think it depends on the race, the candidate, the moment.
Right.
I think it really depends.
And I'm glad to hear you say that because I have found uh, on social media, for example, if I post something along those lines, kind of making that type of comparison, you got to be prepared for the pushback because those comments will be perceived as support of some kind for Donald Trump when it's simply just an analysis of a skill set. Uh, but obviously, off the cuff, as raw as it is, there's something there that you don't see just
Oh, absolutely.
everywhere. Yeah,
And I'll go a step further. I think it also depends on, you play to you have a certain set of skills and then you play to your strengths, right? So Donald Trump's strength is building excitement, at an event within his flock, within his crowd.
yeah,
It's not necessarily doing a debate. And so what does he do? He does fewer debates and more rallies, right? And you
right.
can play to your strengths that way. George Herbert Walker Bush, if you allow me to get kind of nerd out on you,
You
for a
bet.
second here on some history. George Herbert Walker Bush, his strengths were just an absolutely honorable and decent and fine public servant, dating back to his days as a 19-year-old combat pilot in World War II. And of course, again, I disagreed with a lot of his policies, but I mean, you can't question the man's, patriotism and sense of service.
Sure.
And when he's debating, somebody like a Bill Clinton, particularly in a town hall type of a setting, that was not his strength, right? And so
Right.
what you do is, I think the key is, you understand kind of what your skills are as a candidate, and you kind of work within those to kind of, see if you can excel.
Right. Let me ask you what strategies, what approach MCDP has for reaching the voters who are just kind of like, you know, they've they're just kind of reaching their threshold for politics, as so many people are, just because it's been a pretty rough and tense and stress filled 8 or 9 years now. Uh,
Yeah.
how are you strategizing for that to reach and connect with those people and give them a sense of, hey, uh, we're still in the game?
So look, I mean, just like a lot of Democrats, we were unhappy with obviously very unhappy and disappointed, and to a certain extent even surprised by the results of last November. Um, so we wanted to learn from that, and we wanted to do differently. And of course, going, as I think I said, referenced earlier, you feel like you have a good plan going into the election, but the quality of the plan is always determined by the outcome, frankly, right?
Sure.
So the question for us is, and frankly for the people that we're serving, our precinct committee people and activists, is what are we going to do differently? So what we set out to do this year is, we do have a plan, and the plan comprises registering more voters, doing a better job of listening, you know, to Democrats and our activists, and we're doing that in the form of listening tours. Um, we've done several of them already, and literally what we're doing is we're traveling into all parts of the county. We're sitting in a room or community center for a couple of hours, and we just say up front, hey, we're going to be vulnerable. We want to hear what you guys have to say, what keeps you up at night, what's on your mind. We're going to take this information and hope that it better informs how we do our strategy and our messaging. And that's why we're here. And we take all that incoming for a couple of hours. So that's one thing we're doing as well. We're trying to build out, our digital media platforms. We launched a new webpage. maricopadems.org for those who want to check that out. Um,
Fantastic.
and we're trying to do a better job of visiting platforms that heretofore we've not visited, like yours and others, Jack. And so I think one takeaway, at least for me, from last year's election is, um, the president did a superior job of meeting voters where they were. And sometimes that wasn't necessarily, I mean, Democrats tend to, and myself included, tend to think, well, let's look to that debate where so many millions of people are watching. But the other side tends to think of it as, well, no, let's do this and that in podcasts, let's do this and that in digital social media, and we're really trying to do a lot better of that in that area because I think, as I said, as I think I've said earlier, we're trying to play catch up in some of those ways. So
Yeah.
those are the 3 or 4 things that we're doing differently to try to reach people.
Nice. And once again, for anybody watching or listening, correct me if I'm wrong, but maricopadems.org. Is that correct?
maricopadems.org.
Gotcha. Listen, as we kind of wind down here, let me ask you this before we get into the last question. What advice would you give your younger self? So if we go back to your foray into politics, with the experience that you've garnered and the thinking and the wisdom you've developed, if you could go back to that young man and say, let's have coffee. I've got some pointers here for you. What are some of the things that you would tell that Eric?
Well, I think about that from time to time. One thing I would absolutely do differently, I would have charted, frankly, a different path for my professional life, I think. So I kind of got an MBA, went into the business world, and I started out as a White House intern in the mid '90s, and for Vice President Gore specifically, which of course, just so people understand that, at that time there's about 250 interns. And we're also unpaid in that era, so that's another story altogether. They only recently started getting paid, which is incredible. But of the 250, about 20 to 25 were vice presidential. And so the reason why that's important for me is because I developed a pretty close relationship with Al Gore's team,
Yes.
His official team at the time. And the number one thing I'd do differently is I probably would not have left that network behind for such a long time, because I was in the business world and did kind of have some separation from that. And then about a decade ago, I had to kind of start fresh again.
Yeah.
So I definitely would have just charted a different path for myself professionally when I have the opportunity and not have blown that opportunity. For those, who, on occasion, I do have the chance to mentor folks kind of, in their early 20s when I was at that age.
Sure.
Hey, if you have any inkling of wanting to do something in the political or public service space, just go for it. Just dive right in. Um, you know, uh, all of us kind of have different experiences with with our parents and with our fathers. And I was,
Oh, you bet.
where it's like, hey, go out there and make money and get rich and all of that kind of a
Right.
thing. And so
Right.
I kind of fell into that for a number of years. Like, I got to get rich. I got to get rich. And it just wasn't satisfying for me. And really, public service was kind of, politics was always my calling. And whenever I can, I advise people, young people to do that. And that's one thing I would do differently, just kind of follow my heart.
Right. So to close out, I want to ask you to contribute this and tell me your approach. One message that I am really sending out to everybody that I talk to in terms of future voters, right? People who are going to be voting in upcoming elections or who should be voting in upcoming elections. I make sure to start out because I know that's where so many of them are mentally and emotionally. I acknowledge and address that concern, that fear, that election integrity, it could be a question mark because of the kinds of threats that we've heard be made, right? But I follow up with, we have to vote like election integrity will be, straight up and down and as tight as it has ever been. Because I think if you don't blend those two stories, if you don't match their fears with a fact, which is, if we don't vote, that's when we have problems, right?
Yes. Yes.
We have to vote. But I think at the same time, one way to kind of lose trust or risk losing trust is to act like, oh, yeah, there's nothing to being concerned about election integrity. Put that, that's not even a deal. I think people have experienced too much to just wipe it away.
Right.
So I acknowledge it, but then boom, we have, no matter what we are afraid of, no matter what we think could happen, we have to vote anyway. So what is the Eric message to that idea?
So I'm actually going to blow the Republicans' cover here on something to kind of give folks some confidence in the system. And I'm speaking again narrowly in Maricopa County. Our elections officials, so I'm talking specifically not necessarily the elected county recorder here, who is someone who I oppose, and we had another candidate who I supported. But I'm speaking his civil service team, the people who actually do the day-to-day work. They are incredible people, and these are people who they're not political. They just do the work, and then one of the things that we do is both the Democratic, the county Democratic Party, and the county Republican Party actually goes to the election facility before every election, and we both observe trial runs of the system and have the opportunity to approve or disapprove the system prior to every single election, even the most mundane, like bond elections, all the way up obviously to presidential. Both county political parties do that, and that's the dirty little secret to this. So people should understand that after the election, when they hear, oh my goodness, and it was, from the MAGA side that it was fit, hey, the county Republican Party was there approving stuff beforehand. So that's one thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say, and again, just keep me kind of focused on Arizona, is we have a Secretary of State, Adrian Fontes, who, yes, happens to be a Democrat. But Adrian Fontes, this man is a Marine. He is the most hopeless romantic about democracy and this republic that I've ever seen. And pardon my French here, but he will be damned if he even whiffs that there's something that is off or awry or that is not honest or not working with the election. So the folks in Arizona should feel very confident that next year's election is going to be a meaningful election. No one should use that as a pretext or an excuse to not vote. Who was it that said this is a republic if we can keep it? I think that might have been Benjamin Franklin, but we need to just remember that and go to the polls next year when the time comes with that in mind. And let's just not surrender this republic, this nation, to those who would do us harm from within. Let's not do that.
Well said. Those are two fantastic confidence bolstering points that you laid out there. To have someone with that kind of integrity in the position that Adrian is in, and then your dirty little secret, as it were, I can see why Republicans would like to keep that a dirty little secret.
I
right?
just blew their covers, so yeah.
Yeah. No, and I think, and let me kind of backtrack a minute, and oftentimes, and I don't clarify this enough. So many times when I'm talking about election integrity, one of the things that's in my mind, and I probably ought to word it differently, is voting rights, right? Voters' rights.
Oh, yes.
Uh,
Okay. Yeah.
right. I think,
Yeah.
we are watching the attempt and the attack on voting rights to try to decrease the number of people who can vote, and then where that fails, to try and decrease the number of people who will vote. And so, yeah, but that comes right back to the two things that you laid out and the ongoing fights now to defend and protect voting rights. So, yeah, that's
Well, to your point, Jack, I believe there's a bill that's scaring a lot of people. It's called what, the SAVE Act or something like that, which
yes,
essentially would disenfranchise a lot of women in the country, right? Because it has
right,
to do with so many women who choose to change their name when they to take their spouse's name, and very dangerous. And people just need to continue to be vigilant against that stuff and oppose it at every turn. And certainly Democrats in Washington need to oppose that kind of stuff at every turn. There's efforts afoot to tinker and limit and frankly shave voters in one way or another here in Arizona as well. Governor Katie Hobbs has been a stalwart in vetoing, frankly, legislation that's
yes,
very
she has.
and dangerous. But I really urge people to, and there's just so many kind of ridiculous and spurious bills out there, particularly at the state level, trying to shave voters and curtail people's voting rights. But I really urge people to kind of research all of that, be very vigilant. And to your point, Jack, the integrity side of it really it happens at the legislative level, both state and federal level, before the election even happens.
Right.
Not so much during the election, which is all kind of conspiracy theory. Like, people really need to pay close attention to what their state legislatures are doing with trying to, frankly, shave voters off the rolls and curtail voting rights, because that stuff it's very hard to see, but that's why the urgency is for people to pay close attention to it.
Right. Well, listen, I have enjoyed this so much, and I think that the people of Maricopa County are in good hands when they've got you uh, leading the way. And it's clear to me that your corporate leadership experience, uh, it's a foundation. I mean, I can see the foundation, but I can see how flawlessly and seamlessly you've shaped that into this personal thing specifically for the world of politics. And that's something, as I'm sure you've encountered throughout your life, throughout your career. Not everybody from the corporate world is able to blend. They bring that exact strategy, and I can only imagine that's not always the best approach. But it sounds like you've made that something. You took some things that you learned and skills that you gained, but you recognize, hey, this is a different world. And it's clear that you've got an admiration and an appreciation for so many of the people that you had the opportunity to work with and around. And there's just a humbleness about you that comes through. It's clearly you're a very smart guy. You've got a ton of experience, connected, but there's just that humbleness there that allows you to really connect with someone. And that's rare to encounter that in somebody in your unique situation. So I want to say I appreciate you just for being the human being that you are, because I've enjoyed talking to you. Maricopa County, you are in good hands with Eric Limbs. So listen, I'd love to do this again sometime.
Absolutely, Jack. It's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much, and for the kind words. That's kind of you to say. Appreciate it.
You bet, Eric. All right. Well, I will talk to you again soon, and keep that heat for a while, will you? That Arizona heat?
Yeah, we will, buddy. We will.
Okay. All right. Bye-bye, Eric.
Sure. Bye bye.